In the snowy mountains of Valkenheim, there are places few dare to tread, mountains no man, however brave, would risk challenging. Along the northeastern slopes of Valkenheim there is a mountain range known as the Arkesten Mountain Range. The slopes are dangerous, and the land is prone to avalanche. Some say that the mountains are home to dark spirits or angry demons who would push any who dare to tread on their peaks down to the slopes below. However, the prize for one brave enough to try and scale these mountains would be the Valley of Arskatan, a small valley behind the mountain range that, due to the steady flow of melted snow, would provide life-giving water to a land most devoid of lush greenery. It's an oasis in the tundra, and if the Jarl is capable, could perhaps set his home and city there. And one Jarl was, indeed, brave enough. But before he was Jarl, he was Einar, son of Guldar, a humble Jarl of a small territory. In an adventurous youth, he was a slow study, finding more joy in trekking mountains and searching for pleasures and thrills than learning the responsibilities of leadership or war. Of him, his father would often say, "The boy is like an empty wagon on a dirt road. He makes a lot of noise and offers nothing of value." Einar would laugh at this insult. See, Einar loved his father, but he never saw himself being the leader of anything. He was content to joke, to play, and to be what he needed to be, and nothing more. Sure, he trained to be a warrior, but he never saw himself dying in battle or risking his life just to defeat some knight or samurai. And what on earth would be the point of that? "We are the shield of our people," his father would say. "We defend those who cannot defend themselves. We cannot fall." Einar never cared for these lectures. He would listen, but it all felt old to him. The words of an old man with old ideas about things. The land he once called home lay at the base of the Arskatan mountain range. Under the shadow of these mighty slopes, he found himself at home, safe and secure. But those shadows would prove a most dangerous and ominous warning. When Einar turned 28, he married a beautiful maiden named Helga, and with her had a son. But only half a year after their son was born, the drums of war were sounded. An invasion force of samurai had landed in Valkenheim and were pushing north to claim the eastern shores. Einar's little village, he called home, rose up in defense, but the samurai came in a great force, and they were not shy about burning the town to cinders. Einar led his wife and son away with the evacuees to escape the coming death. Forced north, the Vikings found themselves staring up at the mountains, the dreaded slopes that for so long had gazed down at them forebodingly. Now their backs were against it, and Einar watched as his father, his older brother, and the other warriors of his village fought desperately to hold off the samurai forces. He had but one choice: either brave the mountain slopes and die in the hills, or fight back against the samurai and die to their swords. The brave and noble warrior would of course choose the latter, but Einar had more to think about than his honor. Taking his sword and shield, he called the retreat of the civilians and pulled back into the mountains, daring to take the uncharted road. He only looked back once, in time to see a Kensei remove the head of Guldar, his father, with a clean swing of their sword. And as his father fell dead, Einar turned away in shame. He could not shed tears. He could not afford that luxury. He would mourn later. He would apologize later. For now, he needed to survive. Years of childhood spent running through hills and wild areas had prepared Einar for trekking a mountain, but it had not prepared the villagers. There were only 64 survivors, and of them, 29 were thralls or slaves, and the other 35 were carls or freemen. Einar looked at his pitiful band of survivors, and only one thought crossed his mind. We won't survive this. And he was right. The further into the mountain they went, survivors began dying. 3 died after the first 2 days due to injuries in the escape. Another died to frostbite. The day after, one just went missing, no sign of her anywhere. It led Einar to fear that they might have wolves or some other predator on their tail. His wife would stay close, trying to be optimistic, but always asking if he knew where they were going. He did know, but he was trying to cross the mountain to the legendary Arskatan Valley, and he dared not tell any of them that. Some Vikings did not believe the Arskatan Valley existed, and even if they did, to get there meant taking the path over the mountain range, a feat no Viking had successfully done. It was best they not know about this right away. But time marched on. The tired and hungry villagers continued on their trek for nearly 2 weeks. Einar would lead hunting parties every so often to seek deer, goats, and other manner of meats to make into food, but they only helped a little. The women were cold, and children were getting sick. People were becoming restless. Many more were dying. The mountain was angry, and it was taking their lives. Would it have been more merciful to have stayed and let the samurai kill them all? Einar didn't want to think about it yet, but his heart was becoming more and more heavy. They were lost in an angry mountain range. On the 16th day, Einar was standing watch. Of the 64 survivors, 15 were now dead, and 6 had disappeared entirely. People were getting scared, and so was he. As he stood near the sleeping survivors, he saw something that caught his eye. Standing proud and tall in the shadow of frosted pines was a large and glorious hart, a stag with antlers mighty and large, and a body so powerful it might as well have been a horse instead. Einar stared at this majestic beast, and it stared right back at him. This felt like it was no chance encounter. Had the hart sought him out? The creature turned to walk away, but Einar gave chase, abandoning his post to see what the stag had to show him, for surely it had something to offer. He walked for almost a whole kilometer before he finally saw the stag stop. He approached it and saw past it. The stag was gazing out at a sight he'd only dreamed of seeing. Surrounded on all sides by icy peaks, he could see the small valley of green, a simple area of grass and trees that Einar thought he would never lay eyes on. The valley of Arskatan. But it still felt a ways off. They'd make it, though. They could. It was only a few more days' walk. He headed down to meet his small band of refugees and prepared them to move out. The hike was long, slow, and arduous, but it was only becoming worse when a Valkyrie scout came to Einar with a horrid report. The samurai that had erased their village were marching up the mountain on the other side, and if they followed, they would discover the valley if not stopped. Though the mountain had been no kinder to them, they were making good time. Fear ran through the ranks of his little band as Einar took in the news. Rallying up his courage, he turned to his followers and raised his hands for silence. Many of you know me as the son of Guldar, a vagrant and foolish youth, with more energy in my heart than in my head. I never behaved like a leader, but you followed me this far as if I was one. So I ask you now to trust me as you have been. I will not let the samurai take us. I will not let anyone else die until we reach that valley. We're only a day's hike. We will find our haven beyond these hills, and the samurai will trouble us no more. He declared all this, and the words gave hope to the people, but they felt hollow leaving his lips. That night he sat huddled beside his wife and his infant son as they sheltered the boy from the cold. He was latched to his mother's breast, feeding hungrily. Einar stroked the child's head and smiled sadly. For so long, all I ever did was feed on the success of my father, living life like I had only myself to consider. Then I had 2 more to think of, and now I have a whole village. Is this how father felt? What he meant? Is this what it is to be a Jarl, a warlord? A warlord, a Jarl is the shield of his people, the bulwark against destruction. They cannot afford to fall. They cannot afford to break. They are the mountain that stands in defense of the valley. And it all fell on him at once. The mountain was no different than he was. It bore the same responsibility that he had. It would stand against intruders and those who would try to claim the valley behind it, and it would never fall. And so must he. Einar Guldarson picked himself up and walked to his few tired, hungry warriors. Follow me to Valhalla. 10 warriors followed Einar Guldarson, rather than walk along the mountain pass. While Einar led these warriors, his wife would lead the rest of the refugees on to the valley, but he was taking a detour towards where the samurai were coming. After several hours, he stopped his troop and waited. He heard something, the gentle sound of movement, and then he spotted it. The hart, the great stag from before, and again it stood only a few meters away, staring at him, peering into his very soul. What did this great beast want with him? He could not say. His men asked what was wrong, as though the hart was not visible to them. Einar said nothing. If he was truly seeing things and going mad, it wouldn't help morale for his men to think he'd lost his mind. Follow, he ordered. The hart walked off a ways, and Einar followed it. After hiking, The sound of shouting and chanting could be heard far below. The hart looked downward, and Einar followed its gaze as it walked away, to see far below the army of samurai marching unaware along the path. There were maybe 30 or 40 of them. A large number to be sure, more than the villagers could deal with. Einar glared them down and then turned to his men. "They go no further." With vicious resolve and a war cry to reach the halls of Odin, Einar roared his fury. His fellow warriors roared in unison with him. The roar of the Viking sent shivers through the samurai, and it must have reached Thor himself as the mountain began to tremble. Snow came dislodged, mounds of snow came loose and rolled down the mountain in a wave that swept the samurai from their post. But Einar didn't stop. He pursued the fleeing, freezing warriors, chasing after the snowy wave they'd created. And as the few samurai who had evaded the avalanche climbed to their feet, they looked to see Einar himself upon them, sword in hand, teeth gritted in rage. Shields were ringing with the sound of metal on metal. Blood spilled onto the white snow, and the screams of birds and woodland creatures joined in the cries of pain and death on the deadly mountainside. No samurai would return to the mire from that venture, and the samurai who did not die to the snow would count their comrades lucky, for they met their end at the sword of the Lord of Mountains. The High King of Valkenheim would send out other jarls and lords to investigate what became of the once small village owned by Guldar. But only burnt ash would remain. None knew that deep behind the mountains of Arskaton lay the haven of the survivors. A small, thriving Viking village, rebuilding a lush land. Some would try to find what lay on the other side of this mountain, but few would make it to see what lay there. For like the mighty mountain defends the valley behind it, so too does the Lord of the mountain defend his home. A leader to stand above others. A heart who carefully guards what is his. Einar Guldarson, the legendary warlord, will never fall.